Welcome back. Now it's time for our parenting segment. And today we're joined by expert Nwogugu. Now she's the author of The Parent Organizer, and she'll be talking about having the same standard for discipline in the home between parents and their domestic workers. Now this is a big deal. It's a huge deal. A lot of parents don't really think about it much, but I'm very pleased that you were able to come and talk to us. So welcome back and welcome to our new set.
Thank you for having me this morning.
All right. So I know there must have been a reason for you to pick this topic.
Yes.
So what was the reason for it?
I've noticed whenever I go to play with my daughter, to different playgrounds, different activities, I noticed that a lot of kids are very rude to their domestic workers.
Okay.
And I've actually had conversations with some domestic workers who tell me that they're not allowed to discipline these children. And I'm like, there should be an agreed standard of discipline from the parents to the domestic workers and even relatives, because it takes a village to raise a child. But there should be conversations on this is what you should do if this child misbehaves. If the child does this, reports, or there are consequences for this behavior. But now you see a lot of parents allow their children talk to their domestic workers anyhow, and there are no consequences for their behavior. So I think I have a problem with that. So.
Okay, so you know that there are definitely different types of domestic workers.
Yes.
We're talking nannies here, or child care,
nannies, housekeeper.
Yeah. Okay, housekeepers.
We have cooks,
drivers,
and all of that. So it's so important that when you want to hire your domestic workers, that you have a standard of the quality of candidate that you should hire. For me, I would advise for a 21st century parent, you should hire someone who can read and write. For basics. I mean, reading and writing is so important because you want someone who is able to communicate with your children, who can assist and support them even during the homework as well. Even if as a parent, you're still supposed to look at your children's homework or do it with them, but it's very important to have someone who can support you also, you know, on that particular journey of parenting.
So I appreciate the fact that you said, you know, there are a lot of parents that are not conscious of how rude their kids could be to these domestic workers. Now, for myself, I have a rule. You know, I'm very strict with my girls when it comes to talking anyhow to anyone that's above their age.
Yes.
But I think this is just the traditional, maybe Yoruba woman in me.
Yeah.
If you're rude, you're going to apologize and you're likely going to be disciplined for it.
Yeah.
But then why do you think, so where does the discipline start from? So I know some fathers are harder on their sons than their daughters, and vice versa for mothers. Talk to us a bit about that.
I think for discipline, you first of all have to sit down with your partner, your spouse, and decide what style of parenting do you both have. Because most times you meet two people who have different styles of parenting because of how they were raised.
Okay.
You find someone who was raised by an authoritarian parent, some other person has an authoritative parent, another person was raised by a permissive parent. These are all different parenting styles. And then you can now decide how are we going to come together and raise these children, and what kind of discipline would I want both of us to, you know, give this child when the child behaves well or when the child behaves out of character. So you have to discuss it. Most people don't discuss it. You know why? They're just carried away with having the child, paying the bills, going about their work, daily lives, and then they allow their normal emotions to take over. Because, I mean, the child misbehaves, you start hitting the child with a pair of slippers. You start hitting the child with your hands. These were not discussed before they started having children, and that's what you see every day. But when we sit down, talk about it, then we agree. This child is going to do time out if they do this. This child is going to be, you know, will not be rewarded if they misbehave. So you have to discuss this. There are different styles of discipline. One, there's reward, where the child gets rewarded for good behavior, where you catch the child doing something good and you reward the child for their good behavior. Another one, there's time out, where the child is actually misbehaving and you're really not going to hit the child, but say, you know what, I need you to go on time out. This behavior is not acceptable. And that gives them, you know, some time to think about their behavior. There's another one where you actually take privileges from the child. So you tell the child, if you do not do this, you're not going to watch TV, you're not going to get your screen time, and the child knows that you're serious. And it has to be around things that they really, really love. Because most kids will want to, I mean, you can't tell them no TV time, they're going to sit up. But most parents don't have any style. They just hit their children. They're just doing anything. And at the same time, they don't have, they haven't discussed this with their domestic workers. The domestic staff doesn't have any authority to discipline their children in their absence, number one. Number two, they haven't discussed with their partner what style of discipline would we, because I wanted to punish my daughter, kneel down. Mother said no, she can't kneel down, she's not a slave. She can face the wall like she's in a prison. She can do timeout. And we discussed this. It wasn't funny, but now I cannot tell her go and kneel down because it's not acceptable.
For your husband, obviously.
For my husband.
So let me talk a bit about enforcing this discipline.
Yes.
So there is one, you could have the conversation, but then when it comes down to it, and this child is wailing and crying, and daddy, please, daddy, please. One of you is going to break. One of you is going to melt.
True.
And enforcing discipline sometimes ends up landing on the lap of the domestic worker.
True.
So in many cases, I've seen where as soon as the parents go out, the kids sit up because they know that the domestic staff is not going to take nonsense from them.
Yes.
And then it sort of diminishes the authority of the parent. So I'm considering, discussing that particular area, especially when domestic worker comes in and isn't given a template or a list of rules and regulations to go by.
It's so important that there's an agreed standard. The domestic workers should know you can't talk to my child like this. You can't scream at my child. That's abuse. You can do this and you can do this. And then these are the boundaries. They must be agreed, but the child should also know the boundaries. The child should know. So, mommy, she did this. So the child can report if the domestic worker does something outside the agreed mode of discipline. So if that's, most people don't discuss it. They assume, just tell the child, you're older, do whatever you like. Or they don't tell the nanny, and the nanny does whatever she likes. So that's dangerous, very dangerous, and I don't accept that. I think you should discuss and then keep teaching until the nanny understands what you want to achieve.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is as soon as you get the nanny, before work even starts, you have a conversation.
Yes, training.
Should the children be involved in this conversation, or should it be
at the
like
beginning?
A one-on-one?
No, it should be a one-on-one with the nanny first, and then as time goes on, if your child can talk, educate your child that if you misbehave, Mrs. A is going to do this to you. Mrs. B, tell the child that this is what is going to happen. And then educate your child what is agreed. Because you're already teaching your children about bullying before now, and they already know what is the extent of punishment. And most children will tell you, if it's so terrible, they're like, this will happen when you're not around, and the parents will know.
But some kids are kind of smart.
I know.
They take advantage of these things.
Yes, they will.
And they try and play both sides.
Yes.
They want to get their way, and they sort of switch things up on you. So I've actually witnessed it where a parent went crazy at the nanny just because the child said this, and that. Whereas it was a completely different situation. And I know a lot of domestic workers have had that happen before, and they just decide to pull back.
Yes.
They become nonchalant and all that.
That's true.
So is it actually okay for the nanny to completely pull all the way back?
No.
And
I don't think it's okay. I think when your domestic workers see that you're a person of integrity and that you have very good standards, they will respect you and they will understand your vision for raising that child. And you talk to them like human beings. You respect them yourself. If you respect your domestic workers, your children will respect your domestic workers as well. They won't speak to them rudely when you're not at home because they know that this is how my mommy and daddy, they call them by Mrs. They say thank you. They say please. And the child sees you correcting. The child knows that you correct them when they are rude to your domestic workers. So there's some kind of calmness. Everybody understands this is what is not acceptable. I haven't had that issue because they keep seeing us doing the right thing and then scolding the child when the child is rude to them. And the child knows that mommy and daddy doesn't let me speak to this woman this way. So that means even when I'm not at home, if the child does that, the nanny will report. And she has a right to also discipline the child with a timeout or call me on the phone and then I'll speak to the child. So everything, there's a good communication line opening.
I think that there's a lot that everyone has learned at home today. And if you haven't built your own standards with your workers, we're just suggesting that you do something about it right now. Tell us what you think on social media. Use our hashtag WakeUpNigeria on TVC. And if you have questions, you can add the questions as well. I'd like to invite you to our kitchen. Now, Chef Ben has been cooking up a storm. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay.
And